Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, a podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take review of the game we just finished playing, Wonderland's War. But before we jump into a description of that game, I do have some poll results today to talk about. And the question I asked on Twitter was, have you ever backed a Kickstarter of a game that you knew was coming to retail? And if so, why? Now, the reason I asked this question is because there is a game that is about to come to Kickstarter in a couple weeks. I know it's going to come to retail as soon as it's out, as soon as it gets shipped to backers. And there's no Kickstarter exclusives. And yet I'm still very tempted to back it. So I was kind of curious if other people had done it, if they felt the same way. Here are the options I gave on the poll. Why would you back a game that's about to come to retail on Kickstarter? Number 1, to support the creator. Number 2, because I want it first. Number 3, because of exclusives. And number 4, because I'm just a Kickstarter junkie. So how did you guys answer this poll? Did you get a chance to see it?
One of each. All of the above.
I answered this one. I put exclusives. I don't think maybe that's accurate. I don't know. I'm going through my list of games right now. I'm trying to see if there's anything I backed. And I'm super stoked that it has extra special plastic tokens or acrylic thingamajiggers. But nothing here is popping out as to like, oh, this is amazing. I'm so glad I kickstarted and didn't wait for the retail version. I don't know, maybe Canvas has those nice acrylic little ribbons and stuff instead of the cardboard ones, but they look exactly the same. So, and I haven't even like played Canvas in like 6-7 months. So not much going on there. I don't know. I'm really at a loss. What about you, Chris?
No, I was only half joking when I said all three, because really all three are true for me. I am a bit of a Kickstarter junkie, and so I've done some that I probably had no other good reason for doing it other than just the joy of doing Kickstarter. I've had some where I've done it for the exclusives, and I've had other ones where I really wanted to support a project that I believed in. So I think they're all legitimate reasons. Honestly, at this point, I've actually started backing off on my Kickstarting just because I feel like I overdid it a little bit. Not that I'm unsatisfied with the process, but I'm just spending too much damn money.
The fourth option, Chris, that you didn't mention was just wanting it first. Does that drive you at all? Is there anything about like wanting to make sure that you have the game before other people have it and before other people are reviewing it or playing it?
Yeah, I forgot that one, but honestly, that's the one that doesn't really resonate with me. It's the other three that do, and that one, having it first doesn't really motivate me.
Okay, cool. The reason I asked this poll I mentioned is because of a specific game, and that's Wayfarers of the South Tigris, which is a game we reviewed a few weeks ago. I really loved it, and I can't wait to play it. You know, Garfield Games, when they release a game on Kickstarter, they say specifically in the Kickstarter, you do not need to back this. You can wait till it comes to retail. It'll be out shortly after we deliver it to backers. There won't be any exclusives. And so there's not really a good reason for me to back it. Although I do think, I know that Garfield will get a little bit more, a little bit higher percentage of the game if they get it through Kickstarter, which is nice, you know, support them a little bit. Otherwise, I don't have any reason other than I just can't wait to play it. So I'm kind of tempted to just back it just so that I get it, even if it's within a couple weeks of when I could pick it up otherwise. So I'm really tempted here, but here's how other people responded. 40% said they did it to support creators. That's why I backed Motor City, for example. Like, that's a game that they said was coming to retail as well. This is a small project. It's a small company. Let me just support them. So that's a good reason. 10% said I want it first. Not too many there, but some people do care about having it first. I don't care about having it first. I do want this particular game to play it as soon as I can, but I don't care if I've got it before other people do. 44% were with you, Chris, and said exclusives. Or Adam, you said the same thing, I think. I think that's probably the most valid reason to back something that you know is going to come to retail, because that might be the only time you can get parts to it. And actually, we'll talk about this a little bit more in relation to the game that we played tonight. I have some thoughts for a first time maybe that came out of this gameplay tonight. And then 6% said I'm a Kickstarter junkie. So some people are like all in. Yep, I acknowledge who I am.
So the one case I can think of where the exclusives kind of helped out is Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy. A beautiful neoprene mat came with that Kickstarter. It was an add-on. You still get that. But they had the pre-washed miniatures that add such a nice look to the game, and they're all on stands and they're cruising around. You can get this really distinctive poppy player colors as these ships are out there flying around the galaxy. So there was that, and it had some special dice, but that wash all over all the ships makes a really big difference, and it makes it so nice to play.
I have to second that one that Adam just said. I did the same thing with Great Wall. In any game that has a really big set of minis, I think that can be a pretty legitimate way to go because it sure does make a difference having that wash.
I haven't backed a game that I felt like I would have missed out on something exclusive. Like probably Dwellings of Eldervale is probably the closest one for me because there were some exclusives with that, but I ended up selling it, so obviously it wasn't good enough. Cerebria is a great example of a game that the only time you could ever get the pre-painted minis in that is if you backed it on Kickstarter, and they're so beautiful. It's such a nice, awesome upgrade, and I ended up just paying aftermarket for it, so I that would have been a nice one to be a part of, but that's the risk with Kickstarter. You don't know that you're getting a game you're going to love, if you back it.
And that's why you take the risk and you go for that Kickstarter. You get that game you're going to love.
Sometimes you do.
Anachrony, similarly, at the deluxe box, Fractures of Time, Infinity box, all that stuff. It's such a nice set. Everything comes together in one gigantic box. I looked at piecemealing some stuff together with the latest Mind Clash game, or just going to the Mind Clash site and ordering a piecemeal. And so you got to order all the separate stuff, and you got to pile it together in the box yourself, and you got to pull out the metal cubes, and maybe you have organizational little trays and stuff, but it doesn't come together in a super nice package. So I think that Infinity box was a great Kickstarter for Anachrony.
Yeah, in fact, Mind Clash is one company that I will always, going forward, will always be paying attention to their Kickstarters. Like, I'm really glad I backed Voidfall. There's some minor exclusives, if they're even exclusive. I'm not sure if they were. I think some like metal upgrades or whatever. I'm sure the game would have been awesome even without it, but just having that premium experience is awesome. But I've been watching pictures of Perseverance, which is basically like 2 games in one, and it's about people stranded on an island full of dinosaurs. And it looks like this really cool heavy Euro that I really wish I'd backed. And I thought about it back in the day. And now people have all these, the premium components and everything in one box. And maybe I'll be able to get most of this stuff later. But this is one that I do kind of regret not backing. So I probably will still back Wayfarers just because I can't wait to get it. Here are a couple things that some of the people that responded to the poll said. So Pedro said, just once, and ironically it's still shrink wrapped. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. I wanted it soon. I'm trying to stay away from Kickstarter after that. Good lesson, Pedro, I think.
Learned early, learned quickly.
Drew said, some of the games I back are small games. I back to support creators, like I did with Motor City. I occasionally back the huge games, definitely getting a retail release to both get it early first, but also the exclusives. So some of the stuff we were talking about there. Seth Gonzalez said, I often thought of it, but have never actually done it. Stick with it, man. Hold on there. You're doing good. And Board Game Chatterbox said, I picked exclusives, but I don't think it's fully true. I sometimes worry about how accessible retail will be. Hard to get successes like Honey Buzz, Sleeping Gods, and Dwellings of Eldervale. Make me want to secure something I think will be really good for me. This is actually something I didn't mention, and that's fear of missing out. Now, in the poll, though, I said, we're guaranteeing that you can get it in retail. But I have to admit that I backed La Granja for this reason, even though they said we probably won't release it to retail, but we will have it available on our web store. So I didn't really need to back it, but I was a little bit worried that, it would get delivered, it would get great reviews, and then they would sell out before I caught it. And I really wanted to play the final version of the updated version of that game. So I ended up backing it. Last one I'll mention is Definitely a Board Game Podcast, who, by the way, just released an episode last week that I was on as a guest, so go check out the episode of Definitely a Board Game Podcast. He said probably all 4 at one time or another, but now with rising exchange rates and shipping, there has to be something exclusive or deluxe to get me to back. If you're going to back on Kickstarter, if you don't care about just supporting the creator, you have to have a good reason to back it. All right, let's jump into a description of Wonderland's War. Wonderland's War is a bag-building and area control game where you play as the characters from Lewis Carroll's classic story, Alice in Wonderland, fighting to bring back the madness and become the leader of Wonderland. The game is played over 3 rounds with 2 phases each round. The first phase is the Tea Party phase, where you'll take turns moving around the Mad Hatter's table and drafting cards. These cards provide immediate rewards of additional character chips that will go into your bag, supporters that you'll send to one of the 5 regions of Wonderland, Wonderlandians, which are special characters that will support you in battle and give you special abilities, or a number of other unique benefits. After each player has drafted 4 cards, they'll choose a region to send their character, and then the combat phase starts. Combat will resolve in each of the 5 regions of Wonderland. First, any characters will add their starting strength to the battle, and then players simultaneously pull chips out of their bag, adding the number on the chips to their battle strength, as well as adding special abilities that may impact the outcome of the battle. But be careful, because every time you pull a madness chip out of the bag, you'll lose a supporter or character in that battle, and if you lose them all, then you're out of the battle and won't get any of the benefits. After all players have stopped pulling chips from their bags, the player with the most strength gets points and adds a permanent castle in the region, while the other players may still get some other benefits for completing quests or based on some of their chips they've pulled. If the players pulled a forged chip during the battle, then they can turn any one chip they pulled into a number of special benefits or upgrades on their player board. After all 5 regions combats have resolved, then players go back to the tea party and repeat these phases for 2 more rounds. The player with the most points becomes the leader of Wonderland. There are many rules that I didn't cover, but it should give you a general idea how the game plays to follow along with our discussion. Wonderland's War was designed by Ben Eisner and Ian Moss, with art by Manny Tremblay, and it was published by Skybound Games. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about the gameplay and mechanisms of Wonderland's War. Now, this game has just been delivered to Kickstarter backers over the last couple of weeks. We have not played a physical copy. We played on Tabletop Simulator, but this is the official mod from what we can understand. And I reached out to the publishers of the company, and they said they believed that all the components and printed items were pretty much the final deal. We looked at the updated rule book. So I think we played with the final version. You'll get a chance to hear what we thought after our first game.
So I think the first thing I want to jump into here is probably the same thing that you guys want to say. And so I'm going to jump on it first so that I get to say it first. Total FOMO. So this game is divided into 2 major phases each round. There's 3 rounds. Each round is the tea party phase and then the warfare phase. This game has, I think, one of the most effective ways I have ever seen of making warfare exciting for everybody, whether or not you're involved in that warfare. And to take a step back, one of the things that we've talked about a lot when we talk about combat mechanisms is how there's so many games where if you're not involved in the combat, you tune out. And especially if it takes a long time. Now, this game is interesting because it has an incredibly in-depth and long-lasting combat phase because it's a whole half of a round, more or less. So you're at that for quite a bit of time. But what Wonderland's War does is allows the non-combatants to bet on who they think is going to win in the combat. And the benefits of winning that bet are not insignificant. You can get yourself a shard if you lose, and shards are all negative points. Or you can get yourself an additional token for your bag if you win. And that can be huge. I mean, those tokens are basically the bread and butter of your combat phase. And so that can be a huge benefit. And I found when I was playing this, I was on pins and needles regardless of whether I was in the fight or not. And that's a really cool feeling. What did you guys think about that?
The combat mechanism was cool. And then being able to wager on who you thought was going to win. We talked about it, how Fractal and even Eclipse, if there's just 2 people in the combat and the 2 other people aren't in that combat, they're just kind of sitting there with nothing to do for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Here, just that tiny little piece, that tiny little bone of, oh, I might get a little chip I could throw in my bag. This is fantastic. That keeps you interested enough and maybe talking smack enough. Steve and I were like, oh, who'd you bet on? Who'd you bet on? Oh my gosh, this is cool. That kept us into it just enough to make that combat round exciting and keep me paying attention, even when I wasn't in the combat.
Yeah, they solved a problem, a real problem that exists in a lot of games with combat where everybody isn't involved. And this one, they do go long. Those combats can take a while as people are pulling their chips out of their bag and resolving everything. And it was pretty neat that the outcome of that wager was impactful, right? Getting another chip of your choice is cool, but you do get a little minor, one little negative effect, not major, but still enough for you to be like, oh, I wish Chris would have won because I bet on him. So very cool. I hope more games do this type of thing in the future. And I could even see in a game like Eclipse, where you could make that thematic. You could be like becoming a political ally with somebody for that conflict. And if they lose, then you don't get something. But if they win, you get a little extra benefit from it. So this would be an awesome mechanism to have an eclipse. It would make it so much more fun when you're not involved in the conflict.
It seems so effective and so simple that I'm actually surprised that more people haven't done it already.
I couldn't agree more, you guys. Like, how fun would that be if, say, Chris and I did have a formal alliance in Eclipse, and then Chris is going into battle with Tim, and so I have stakes in that. It's just, it echoes real life, the real space battles that I was in last week, and my allies lost a lot because I lost the battle. No, so it makes sense, proxy wars, this and that. If a powerhouse wins, then other countries are going to benefit from a country, quote unquote, winning. And a country that is struggling in a war, well, their allies are also going to struggle too and feel the perils of losing that battle with them. So I think it's terribly thematic, and it just makes it super interesting for everybody else involved in that board game.
Yeah, so let me jump into, since we're talking about conflict, let's talk about some of the other elements of conflict. And obviously the gist of this whole game is bag building, and it does it such an interesting way. It's clearly inspired by like Quacksequedlinburg, where you're getting different types of chits and trying to basically increase your odds of success. And in this case, the time when you're pulling back the chips out of your bag is during a conflict. And one of the things I thought was really cool here is that it takes that same whole mechanism set, but makes it so that you're not just playing multiplayer solitaire. In Quacks, you don't really care what your opponents are doing other than, you're hoping to pull better than they do so you get more points. In this case, it really matters what other people are pulling, because you could lose a lot of points if they manage to do better than you in that conflict. Very cool. Some other things that happen with that conflict, though, are, the fact that all of the different ships that you're pulling out may have different abilities. Some of them based on, the chips that anyone can pull from, but some of them because you got the Wonderlandian artifacts, which can be really unique to you. Some of them because you unlocked special abilities that your faction does with their chips. So every time someone was pulling a chip out there, it was fun to see what the power was, but also see what it did at that point. And just like Quacksequedlinburg, we only played with one set of what the base, chips could do. But there's like, I think 4 or 6 other sets within the base box. So that's going to give you a lot of variability. You can play with different complete sets. Yeah, I love everything that they took from Quacks and this bag building mechanism and how they put it into to make conflict really fun in an area control game. This was probably one of my favorite experiences in an area control situation. Even when you lost, it was a big event. It was exciting. It wasn't just a roll of a dice. It was something that you got to build up for. And yeah, you can have a bad pull, but most of the time, it was a mix and it was some ups and downs. Oh, I just got 5 up ahead of him. Oh no, now I just got a negative shard and they caught up to me. And so it was just always this up and down with each conflict. I had a great time with the combat in this area control game.
One of the things I liked about that too, Tim, was that it felt to me like the fact that the combat built up pull over pull over pull, and there was these little increments that you kept going up, that it felt less confrontational to me. It felt less like we were, duking it out. And I mean, there's certain situations where you do something and it directly impacts another player. Like I had a card that let me pull one of their tokens out of a battle before the battle started. And that obviously...
Chris, you did a lot of things that directly impacted me. It wasn't generally during the combat, but you were a real jerk to me tonight.
But that's normal. I mean, that's not unusual. But seriously, I felt like there was less... It was part of the whimsy, too. I mean, part of this was that it felt whimsical as you're doing all these things. But the combat to me, like I think about a game like Blood Rage and how I take it personally. Every time somebody throws down a card that like wails on me, I hate that. I mean, I love the game. I love the combat mechanism. But man, that's a burner, right? When somebody hits you like that. Whereas in Wonderland's War, it felt like even though I was winning or losing to one of you guys, it didn't feel like we were fighting each other. It felt like we were fighting the bags. It felt like we were pushing it. Like my winning or losing was a question of whether or not I wanted to push my luck on that. And there's something attractive about that because not everybody likes that kind of head-to-head combat. We've talked many times, Tim, about how you don't love that feeling of beating up on each other, which I kind of get as well. And I thought that this game had a really nice way of having an engaging combat mechanism that at the same time didn't feel too aggressive.
I think part of what made that combat system so engaging as well was both the quest and the forging aspects of it. So you want to participate in these combats, even if you know you're not going to win. You get one of your supporters out there, is what they call them. So if you have a supporter in the region that's going to the conflict, you get to start drawing chips out of your bag. And if you get this forged chip, well, later on at the end of the combat, you get to upgrade your personal strength or you unlock some abilities. So I thought that was kind of neat. Sometimes you just want to be in there so you can do a forge. Also, there's a track. So this track tracks your strength. And some of those numbers have a forge associated with those too. So there's a decision, do I want to go for that next forge up there? Am I happy here with a solid lead of 10? Are they going to keep going and drawing their little tiny chips and catch up to me? So there's just great decision making in the combat as well. Additionally, I mentioned the quest aspect. So some of these quests are like, you don't have to win. It just says end a battle with a strength of 4, 7, or 11. And that gets you 3 points now and maybe 6 points later. The questing and the forging, I thought, made this game tremendously interesting when it came to the combat as well.
Those are great things to call out, Adam, and I think we could spend a half hour just talking about the forging here, because the decision space there was so awesome. Like, if you're going to do a forge action, you have to give up one of your chips. It could be your forge chip, but it could be something else. And sometimes, like, forging is hugely impactful, but sometimes it was still a tough decision because you know you're giving up one of the good chips that you might want for another round. And sometimes I had to, forego that decision. But when you make that forge decision, so many cool choices. Like, there's 4 tracks you can start to forge, basically put chips on, and when you cover a space on one of these tracks, you get the benefit immediately. And when you get to the end of one of the tracks, you get a new, like, big, powerful chip, usually a 3-point chip. And so, like, the track started at the top, it was just 2 spaces. So you could get to that 3-point chip quickly, but it was a fairly minor effect, versus the bottom track is going to give you some big endgame scoring points if you cover it up, but they're not going to do anything for you immediately. So it really created challenging choices every time you had the opportunity to forge. And like you said, by putting the forge, some of those icons in the power track, sometimes you just wanted to stop combat at a certain point, even if you might be able to push your luck and get to the next level. That was so cool. So many really great decisions that they gave you to make there. It was not just, do I keep pushing until I win the combat or I lose it? It was like, well, this may be a great opportunity to stop. I remember one of the biggest conflicts, I set myself up in the first round to, I had 2 quest cards in the Red Tower, I think it was called. But I wanted to win the region too, and I committed all in, and I had a ton of workers. I had my character in there. And so we're going into this thing, and I thought I had a pretty good advantage. And I got to the point where I got to 2 chips, and I was like, well, I'm not going to stop there. I got to fight Chris for this one. And I kept pulling, and I got to the point where I was at 10 power, and I was like, okay, well, if I surpass this, if I keep going, I'm going to lose this quest. That's okay. I'll come back to it later. And then I pull up to my sixth chip, and Chris is just a little bit ahead of me. And I was just like, oh, if I stop here, at least I could win this quest. I can still take second place here. And I didn't. I kept pushing because I wanted to win the conflict. And I didn't end up winning either of the quests that round because I was too excited to push for the conflict. How many cool choices are that? And that was in the first round. So yeah, love the conflict here. I would even hasten to say that if we were doing our top 5 combat mechanisms episode today, this would make my list. I guarantee it. It was so much fun.
Another thing I want to mention about the quests that was cool to me was that initially you have this little goal in your hand that's worth 3 points. Nobody else knows what you're trying to do. They might surmise what you're trying to go for, but it's secret. Once you accomplish it, you put it out there. Now it's public knowledge. And if you complete the second part of that quest, it's an additional 6 points because you'll complete the whole entire card. So it goes from 3 points to 9 points total. I really like, if you're playing this game in depth and really looking around, you could try to see the bottom part of Steve's quest card. Oh, shoot. Now I know he's going to try to win over in Tolgi, whatever it was. Tolgi Gardens.
I guess.
Now you have this public info. You know what he's trying to go for. So you could actually start trying to block that if it came down to, some specific tactics, or you wanted to try to rein in the leader. You could see what kind of quests you want to prevent them from accomplishing. So that was just a nuance that can be exploited as you play this game more and more. I thought that was a really nice, subtle piece to those quest cards.
And to add to that, some of the quest cards, the bottom, the kind of the end game focus of it was like having a certain number of character pieces in your bag. So you could actually hate draft against your opponents as well, because there might only be a couple cards that come up in the Tea Party phase that let you pull flamingos. And if I had two of those end game scoring cards that gave me points if I had 7 or more flamingos. And if I hadn't been able to pull my last flamingo in the last round, I wouldn't have hit 6, that would be another 12 points out of that. And so you can actually not only impact them in the combat, but you can impact them in the drafting phase as well. Very cool.
So let me jump in on another item that I liked in this game, another mechanism. And that was the rondelle that allowed you to pick your cards and your actions in the tea party phase of the game. This was a mechanism that I didn't think was particularly unique. I mean, it was actually pretty run-of-the-mill, but I really enjoyed the way that it worked. And one, the actions were really interesting because this allowed you to pick up Wonderlandians. It allowed you to put characters out on the board. It allowed you to draw new combat chips. Basically, all the things that you do throughout the game would be dictated by what was around this tea party table. And the cards would be placed one at each seat, and you'd move around and grab a card, pick a seat, and then when you made it all the way around the table, you'd end up rolling the die, you'd get some shards potentially, and you'd reset the table and you put some new cards out. So there's always something interesting happening there. And even if this wasn't the most unique way of handling action selection, it was just fun. And part of that, I think, is the fact that it was so thematically interesting. And we played Rondell games before. I think of Merchants of the Dark Road, Glenmore. I mean, these are games where, to a greater or lesser extent, there is success in how they make the game operate. But there was something about this game that just seems so thematic and whimsical and fun that you have these characters, all of whom are very familiar from the Lewis Carroll books. It's like you're playing this funny game of musical chairs with these whimsical characters, and it feels so thematically appropriate, and at the same time you're getting to do these really cool, fun, interesting options for your actions that I just thought that was an absolute blast.
Yeah, Chris, we were talking about this during the game. It's like a rondelle, but also a draft. You have these cards splayed out there, and it's kind of a race. What do you want to do? Do you want to jump ahead, and you want to grab this card first at the risk of making it to the head of table first and taking a little penalty? So it's just a great way of presenting the actions. It's open information. You know what card might benefit you the most. You know what card might benefit Tim the most. You want to take that card and maybe cause him a little bit of damage and not help yourself out. So again, it gives you so many excellent choices. The way it presents the information, it was a fun mechanism and super thematic, like you said, Chris. Walking around on, we're getting into a little bit more, but walking around on the plates and just a beautifully drawn. I'll stick to it right there, and we'll get into the theme here in a little bit because I'm excited to talk about that too.
Yeah, and not only was the mechanism of how you drafted the cards great. It was an open draft. You could see what other people were doing, what they were picking, and you had those tough decisions. But the cards themselves were all super fun choices. Like, you get a couple benefits, maybe a choice of 2 powerful benefits. If it's a particularly powerful card, you got to roll that shard die and potentially take a negative impact from that. So that was a tough choice. And then some of the cards would give you extra, characters, supporters that you could move out into the area control areas. What a great set of choices you got to make in that phase. We already talked about the combat phase. The tea party phase was just as fun. This is a game where this game had 2 completely separate pieces, and I had a blast playing both of them. It was fun from start to finish as you're going through these rounds.
We touched on the shards, and something that we forgot to do at the end of our game was do those minus points for shards. I was, I thought I had a good looking back. I think it was, 5 points behind you, Tim, something like that. But I should have been an additional 9 points lower down, however many negative points you get for shards. I should have been way, way back there. I thought that is a good kind of penalty, kind of a check yourself mechanism that we forgot to do. We talked about it in the middle of the game, but whoops.
It was cool because the game is a push your luck, right? There's all kinds of things that let you make the choices. Like, should I keep going or should I stop? Should I keep going or should I stop? And the shards, they even added push your luck in the drafting phase. Like, should I take this thing that's going to make me roll the shard die? Should I go past the head of the table where I'm going to have to roll the shard die and get more shards? Potentially get another negative chip into your bag, but also there are negative points, like you said, at the end of the game, Adam. All right, so let's talk about something that is related to the gameplay, but also related to the production, and so then can kind of transition right into that, and that is that there is one of the most complex player aids I've ever seen in a game. It's a 2-piece player aid that comes with the game, and it looks like two big data flow diagrams. Basically they're these decision trees that walk you through what you're going to do during the drafting phase, what you're going to do during the combat phase, and then there's a couple little side charts about what to do at the end of combat, etc. This was a really helpful chart to walk through the first couple of times, but after that, it is just way too much information to process. So there's a positive in that it gives you everything you need to know to walk through a round. The negative is that the game is just, for what it is, it's just a little bit too much to have to go through every round. Now, we didn't have to use the player aid at all for the drafting phase or for the combat phase after the first round, but we will never not have to use the end of combat and end of round flow charts that they had there. It is a lot of things with each combat, because there's 6 combats in every combat phase, right? And at the end of each combat, then we'd have to go through and kind of calculate down, okay, who got first place, who got second place. Then you go to end, like the abilities on your chips. Then you do your forging. Then you see who won the wager. And it was just like this big list of decisions. It's a cool component, which is why I wanted to mention as we're transitioning here. But I do think it's probably the biggest flaw of the game, and that for what it is, the game has too many things that you have to remember, too many things to track. I think it's worth it. Let me just say that right now. I don't think it's negative enough to not be willing to play this game, because I loved the experience of this game. But I think it's a lot to follow, and it's a lot to keep up with for a game that is otherwise fairly quick and lightweight.
I can forgive that in this case, Tim, because I didn't feel like it was a lot of needless complexity. It felt like there were a lot of relatively simple things that you had to do that you just had to remember to do. So having them in a list was a reasonable aid, I thought. So after the round 1, when we saw that list, we didn't have to look up each of those items and figure out, what does that mean? How do I do that? We knew what it meant. We knew how to do the goals. We knew how to do the wagering and all those things. So I thought it was really relatively simple, but it required a reminder. And there's plenty of good games that have that kind of a player aid. I think of Feast for Odin, which has 12 parts of any given round, and you just have to remember what order the things go in. And once you've played it once or twice, you know it. You just have to be reminded. Same thing with this. Actually, strangely, this game has come up quite a few times recently on this same topic. Robotech Reconstruction had a very detailed and effective player aid that told you how to wrap up a round. So that didn't bother me in this case. I think it was a little bit intimidating when we started. I thought it might have been a problem, but by the time we ended up finishing our game, I felt pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, it didn't bother me that much. It's at first it seemed like a lot going on there, but it was important. The order really mattered on the way you do this cleanup phase, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, is a cleanup phase after combat. For instance, there was some parts of the game that let you forge, and as part of a forge, you might gain a quest card. Well, it was earlier in the cleanup phase that you play your quest card, so even though you just gain a quest card now, you can't play it because you have to wait for the next combat. So just simple kind of nuanced stuff like that. It's important, and it's good that they have a flow chart. I think with a second or third play, you're going to have some acronym or some flow that's going to be easy to track this stuff, and you'll have it down before too long. But yeah, on a first play, there was a lot going on there.
Otherwise, from a production and theme perspective, this game just knocks it out of the park. One of the coolest productions I've seen. I love the artwork style in it. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that there was a game that I had wished I'd back on Kickstarter, and this is one of them. I remember seeing it when it came up at the time. Skybound Games, did a good job of marketing it, and I was impressed by it. Unfortunately, I didn't look close enough into the mechanisms, because I can tell you when I sat down to learn this game and I read through the rule book and watched the how to play video, I was immediately sold on it. And the how to play video was out there when the Kickstarter was available. So I wish I'd watched that, because I would have backed it. And this game does have some exclusive components from what I understand. I think it's still going to be a beautiful, very cool production when you can get the retail version. Would have been nice to get some of the even more premium stuff here, but the artwork's awesome. It looks like the components are high quality. The board's beautiful. The player mats are beautiful. This is just a top-notch production to go along with a super fun game.
Yeah, the production on this game was incredible. I'd love to see the physical production of it. I mean, we played on TTS, and I'd love to see this with the minis and with the standees and with the art. I mean, we got a pretty good view of the art, and honestly, it absolutely blew me away. It was so fun. It was so engaging. It was so whimsical and so perfect for this game that I just wanted to sit there and look at it. If we were a couple of years ago, a year ago, I don't know, whatever it was, we did our favorite art in a board game episode, and this would probably make my list now if we were doing that episode. It was that much fun. And I'd love to see how the rest of the physical production fits in with the art that I enjoyed so much.
Yeah, I gotta echo what you guys are saying. The art is fantastic. It draws you in. At first, I was a little bit hesitant with the board. I was like, what's going on here? But then your eyes start to settle in. You see these, five distinct regions in the main table area and the little tracker across the top. It's really pretty simple. So it's not only is the art fantastic, the user experience is great. It reminds me so much of that old Alice in Wonderland cartoon. You have these strange spatial disorientations of these different landscapes, this sort of psychedelic cartoony art going on. It's fantastic. It draws you in. Now, one thing I'm hesitant about is all of the stuff. I feel like setup time might take a hefty effort. You might have to dedicate a solid half an hour to getting this thing ready to go. I'm sure there's going to be some aftermarket organizers that'll help speed things up, but there's a lot of little teeny chips and this and that and player boards and stuff you got to have ready, and so that could be a little bit tedious.
That's a great call out, Adam, and I think you're absolutely right on that. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I like the game so much that I would overlook that in this case. And I'm glad you called out the user experience as well, because it is just remarkable how well they did this. Tracking the power on the main board is critical rather than just trying to count up all the chips in between each round. So it was great that they put the tracker right there. The way that the Tea Party phase worked, and it was never a question about like when were you going to trigger resetting the cards and rolling the shard die. Just everything works so well here. One thing we didn't even talk about in mechanisms was the asymmetric player boards. And the player boards are a thing of beauty. Got these faction abilities that are all visible on the left-hand side of the board, even though they're not unlocked at the beginning. But it doesn't cover up, like to unlock it, you don't have to remove anything to see what's going to unlock. The ability to forge and trigger the other abilities, the iconography in the entire game, there's a lot of it, but it didn't take very long to understand what it all did. There's a clear play rate on this. And in this case, almost every card, it worked fine with language independence. There was we had a couple minor questions on, probably need to look up an FAQ or an index on. But for the most part, the iconography is pretty clear. Once you look at it one time, you know exactly what it does. I really love the experience of interacting with this game and playing it. All right, so let's jump into our final thoughts on Wonderland's War and the age-old question, would you request to play this game again?
No doubt. I mean, this game was a blast. One of the things that I think is a great yardstick of how good a game is how much laughter there is around the table as we're playing a game. And everybody was having a good time tonight. Or at least I thought everybody was having a good time. I hope everybody was having a good time. But we were joking and goofing and laughing about the things we were doing. That to me that's what game night's all about, right? I mean, we do this for a podcast, but we also do it because we love playing games. And everybody seemed to be having such a fun time this evening that I felt like this game knocked it out of the park. It was delightful is the best word that I can think of to describe this game, and I would love to play this game again. Now, I am going to say, not because of anything other than I just feel like I need to say this, but my crappy luck in the last battle of this game cost me the game. So, buyer beware. There's that luck element that I went from first place to last place because of an unlucky draw in the last battle of the game. And I can live with that because I had so much fun in the rest of the game but there you go.
Yeah, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. I would absolutely request to play this game again. We were having fun. Everybody was laughing. It felt light and breezy. It ended up taking quite a length of time, which again would speed up on subsequent play. So that last half hour, 20 minutes, I was starting to slow down a little bit, but that was after a fierce, fantastic, light, breezy first portion of the game. I had so much fun playing this thing. I say light and breezy, but there's enough depth and thought and great decisions to be made that it kept me engaged. It struck that right balance between light and breezy and brain engaging, neuron firing, thought provoking decision making process that I love in board games. So yeah, would like to get this one to the table. Maybe I'll even take a look at buying it, see how much this thing's going to cost, and if it's going to join my collection.
Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye open for this. I want to pick it up. I really enjoyed this game. There are not many games that have been quite as fun of an experience. Clank comes to mind when I first got introduced to Clank, and kind of the experience, the push your luck, the fun theme, the excitement, the cool decisions. And Wonderland's War kind of brings that Clank experience and it expands on it, does some really cool things. I'm not a big fan of area control, but I had such a fun time with this game that I didn't even care. And I think that's the key of it, right? Like, I think the fun that we got out of this fixed any of the issues that I would have normally had, the complaints, the niggles that I would have had with the game. There's a lot to track and around, probably went a little long. There's a lot of setup for it, but I don't care. It was too much fun. I can look past that stuff. So the game was a blast. This is why I'm into board gaming, and this is one of the best experiences that I've had, and one of the best examples of firing on all cylinders with this group of mechanisms that were put together. The designers on this, obviously a cooperative effort, and it shows that somebody put a lot of thought into refining this game and making it really work. You can feel that this thing, they kept playing it until it just became fun, and that's what it is. Love it. Will be requesting to play it. We'll probably add it to my collection. Hopefully I can find a Kickstarter copy if there's anything exclusive. I gotta look into that. But I just want the best version of this game because it's awesome and it deserves it.
Hey, I want to double down on what you said there about Clank, Tim. This gave me a lot of that same good feeling that Clank does. And I think for a lot of the same reasons, that it was great mechanisms, a lot of fun, and just kind of a whimsical, enjoyable, fun vibe overall.
Yeah. No, I will say, I wonder who is the target on it. I don't know. Like, this game takes a bit to track and to get into, and some tough strategic decisions. It's not a gateway game. Is somebody who wants a serious strategic game going to have fun with it if they're pushing their luck and then things fail on them? I don't know, but somehow all four of us had a blast with it. So maybe it is the right fit for anybody, no matter what group you are. For most people, it's hard to calculate how it's going to hit for other people, but for us, it was a huge hit.
Do you think this would be a good game for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old? I feel like a 10-year-old can handle this game. Build up a bag and put your characters in this little area, and you're drawing stuff out. You're just having a grand old time. There's nothing overly complex about any of the separate sections of this game that's going to require the mastermind brain of a 30-year-old genius to figure it out. I think this game would be great for that early teen and anywhere up from there. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right, Adam. I think it's kind of like Clank in that way too, in that, to absorb the rules and to understand all the iconography, it probably felt a little weightier to us because it was us going through it for the first time and playing it for the first time. But I think if you sat down, you ran the game, you taught somebody else, you answered their questions as you're going through it, it would be pretty straightforward for them. So you're probably right. It probably felt heavier than it actually was because of us learning it at the same time. But I think you'd be fine playing this with a 10, 11-year-old. I played Clank with my daughter at 8, and yeah, she wasn't always making the best strategic decision, but who cares? She can pick a card to add to her deck. She knows how to do that. She can pick where she wants to move around the ship. This is the same thing. And sometimes she was successful. Sometimes she pushed her luck and it worked. And so, you can still have that fun experience even if you're not making the perfect choice.
I thought of this because my daughter was playing a bingo app on her phone. My daughter's 6. She'd be 48. Oh, boop, boop, boop. And she'd have her little dot. Her finger was her dauber, and she's marking this down. That's kind of like pulling these little chits out of the bag. Ooh, I got a 3. And you move up your thing, 3. Ooh, I got a 5. And you move up. So that whole kind of excitement of drawing it out and seeing where you end up on this track, I think it would just be a fantastic time for almost anybody.
Now, I want to push back just a little bit here because, and I'm not in any way that I disagree that it's a great game because I love the game. I had a lot of fun with it. I could not see playing this with my 10-year-old. There is a lot of strategic complexity here that I think is going to be over a kid's head. What I was thinking when Tim was asking the question originally was, is this just a light, breezy, whimsical game for hardcore gamers? And maybe that's the space this lives in. I mean, we're pretty serious about our games and we don't mind having some complexity, but this is one where it's a little bit lighter, partially because of theme, partially because it's luck-based, but it does have enough complexity in the rule set and enough strategic decision-making that I think it's very satisfying to folks like us, but I think might be a little bit heavy for somebody younger or somebody who's not a pretty serious gamer.
You're right, Chris. Now that you mention that, it was just because of my skill that I won, just like Legrand, huh? It's 2 game nights in a row, clearly not luck-based. All right, well, that will wrap up our conversation on Wonderland's War. We'll talk about a Wonderland's War themed cocktail, as well as some games that have been on our table, and some future takes right after this. All right, welcome back. Chris, what do you have for us this week?
So this week, the Wonderland books by Lewis Carroll are these amazing classics. And that's not just because of the great storytelling, but they're also filled with these wacky, imaginative characters. I mean, we saw them all in the game tonight. And it's pretty tough to find any character more weird, enigmatic, and just downright interesting and fun than the Cheshire Cat. That's probably why he's on the box cover for Wonderland Wars, and it's definitely why I chose to play him tonight. I love me some Cheshire Cat. That's also why I chose the Cheshire Cat for this week's themed cocktail. This is a tasty treat that comes to us from the Looking Glass Cocktail Club in London. And another reason I picked this drink is that it's a riff on a different drink that I really love as well, and that's the Vieux Carré. That's a drink that comes from New Orleans and unsurprisingly, features bourbon or rye whiskey, which are 2 of my favorites. The Cheshire Cat twists that American classic and makes it right at home in the UK by substituting Scotch whiskey for the American whiskey in the Vieux Carré. So here's what you'll need. 1.5 ounces of cognac or brandy, 2/3 of an ounce of blended Scotch whiskey, a 1/2 ounce of cherry brandy. Now, this is a very strong flavored cherry liqueur that isn't necessarily in everyone's pantry, but it's an ingredient that you may be familiar with from my very first cocktail segment on this show, where we used it for the Blood and Sand, the themed cocktail that we had for Kemet. The good old days, right? Anyhow, I mentioned way back then that 2 of my favorites are Cherry Hearing and Leopold Brothers Michigan Tart Cherry. 2 very good options. Again, it's not something that everybody has, but if you're willing to invest in a bottle of it, there's lots of fun you can have with it. And there's 2 drinks right there that are super enjoyable that you can make good use of a bottle of either of those. But I digress. You'll also need a 1/2 ounce of sweet red vermouth, 1/6 of an ounce or just a dash of cinnamon syrup, and a rosemary sprig for a garnish. Now you're going to mix those ingredients, stir them with ice, and strain the whole thing into a glass with new ice, ideally one of those big honkin' ice blocks or spheres that us cocktail geeks like to use so much. You add the rosemary sprig and enjoy. I'm pretty sure you're going to end up with a Cheshire Cat grin on your face, but don't blame me if the rest of you disappears.
Chris, I really wish I could have tried this drink tonight. It sounded so good, and I had like half the ingredients in my cabinet. I even had some fresh rosemary on a bush out in my garden. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the timing happen to get the rest of the ingredients I need. So I actually plan to try this one again. This is one I really want to go back and visit because it sounds like a really wonderful mix. What did you think of it?
I loved it. I was actually a little skeptical at first because I'm a huge fan of the Vieux Carré and a lot of these bourbon cocktails. So I thought, this will be interesting, but it's not something I'd go back to over and over again. But honestly, after trying it now, I've got a bottle of cherry brandy that I keep around the house, Cherry Hearing, and I have a bottle of Scotch whiskey, both of which I don't use for a ton of other things. And this is a great way to put those together and make a delightful cocktail that I would have for everyday drinking.
Nice. Sounds good. All right, well, let's jump into some games that have been on our table this week.
So this week, my game on the table, or on the virtual online table, I should say, is Diplomacy. I recently started playing board games with a group of folks here in Portland, and I was invited to a game of Diplomacy, which the irony is not lost on me that last week when we were doing our most controversial game mechanisms, I completely agreed with negotiation as one of my least favorite game mechanisms. And this is a game that is basically nothing but negotiation. For those who haven't played it or are not familiar, essentially Diplomacy is a game where you have this simple map of Europe. Each player has a country, and each country has fleets, armies, and supply depots. And you have this incredibly simple set of actions you can take. You can move your armies and start a fight. You can take over a supply depot. You can, it's this really basic, simple, I think there's like 4 moves that you can make in the entire game. And the entire rest of the game is negotiating or trying to conduct diplomacy with all the other players. And I think somebody joked to me that what this game does has been destroying friendships since the 1970s. And I can definitely see that, because there's a reputation that this is a game where you basically lie to everybody. And the way that the game works is you take these turns over the course of rounds. And the way we have our game set up online, it adjudicates once a week. So basically you get to put do all your communications back and forth with the other countries, which you do anonymously. So nobody knows who's making the comments. They know which country it is, but they don't know what player it is. And at the end of that period, all the turns get resolved. But in the meantime, you're trying to convince people like, oh, hey, Adam, we should do a pincer move around Tim and take him out. And what I'm actually doing is I'm setting up my turns so that when it gets adjudicated, I'm attacking Adam. It's that kind of thing. Incredibly simple, incredibly duplicitous, apparently. I haven't played much of it yet, so I don't have a lot to say about it. I think we're still on the first turn because we have it set to, I think, 1 adjudication a week, which is a lot of time. But I'm dying to see how this game feels, because I feel like I'm either going to hate it more than I've ever hated any game I've ever played, or it's going to expand my horizons, and I'm interested to see which way this comes out. So tune back in I don't know, 6 months, a year or so when this game is finally over, and maybe I can report back the outcome to you.
Yeah, Chris, I was going to be very interested to hear your thoughts on this one when it's all over. Like you said, you said it, like 6 months, a year. Who knows how long it's going to take it, 1 week per turn. But this sounds like my worst nightmare. That's why I'm so interested to see if it turns you around, if you're really enjoying this thing. Next thing you're going to be saying is, Adam and Tim, we got to play this thing, man. So looking forward to the follow.
Yeah, and when Chris says, Adam and Tim, you got to play this thing, I'd be like, hell no. Because Adam and Chris would be like, hey, Tim, he's always winning these games, so we gotta like do that pincher movement on him and make sure to stop him. And then you guys wouldn't even be duplicitous with each other. You just do it. Take me out. No, thank you. Not at all interested in this game.
Tim, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that we're not out to get you.
That sounds a little self-fulfilling also, Tim. So I think now we should take you out.
Yeah.
No, it does. It actually really does sound painful to me to know that the only way you can actually win at this game is to eventually lie to your opponents about what you're doing. And it just sounds, there's not a single element of it that sounds fun to me. So I am really interested to hear, Chris, how it falls for you, because I feel like you're going to probably feel the same way. But who knows? Sometimes these social interactions can land in a way that you're not expecting them to. So
I'll learn something either way. I'll either learn that I truly do hate this as much as I think I do, or I may find that there's something interesting here that I hadn't really anticipated. I mean, you and I were joking today about how you never thought that I was going to like Feast for Odin.
Right.
Now I'm addicted to Feast for Odin. I can't get enough of the game. So who knows? Maybe this will be another one of those. I don't think so, but it might just be.
Going back to Diplomacy, it feels like a game to me that should just be called Who is the Best Manipulator? And that's not a trait that I like in myself. I know I can do it, and I don't like that trait in other people, and I try to avoid it as much as possible, even though I know it's not totally avoidable and it's everywhere in life. So maybe I'm just naive.
All right, well, I'm going to talk about a game that I've been playing a lot of lately, and that's Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Now, I've been talking about Paladins of the West Kingdom, which is the second game in the West Kingdom trilogy from Garphill Games and Shem Phillips and Sam McDonald recently. You know that I've had a great time with it. Highly recommend it. So, a few weeks back, a month ago or so, I went to a local convention and got a chance to play Architects of the West Kingdom for the first time. This is the first of the trilogy. It's a game I've had my eye on for a while. Always felt like it was going to be a little bit too light, straightforward worker placement, so I didn't pursue it, but I was excited to finally get to play it, and it did not disappoint. I had a really good time with it. This might finally be the, kind of entry weight or mid-weight worker placement game that would knock Lords of Waterdeep off that post for me. I really enjoyed it. So after playing those two games and having such a great time, I got to try the third in the series. So I posted on Twitter one day that I was really interested in trying Viscounts of the West Kingdom, and lo and behold, Shem Phillips reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I'll send you a copy, and you can give it a try." So I kindly got a review copy of Viscounts of the West Kingdom from Shem, and this game is really interesting. So bear with me. I'm going to give you a little bit of detail here. Might be hard to track, but I think it's worth it. This is a deck building game, but it's one of the most unique and fun, in my perspective, takes on deck building that I've ever had a chance to play. The little bit of a layout. The board is basically it's a big rondel. In the middle of it is this plastic component that is supposed to be the castle in the West Kingdom. And around it are 5 pie-shaped or pizza-shaped wedges that make this map. And so they're interchangeable. So every time you play, they're going to be laid out in a different order. You can also flip them over for different player counts. So they get more, busy, or, there's less spaces or more spaces depending on how many players you have. So what you have around the board is each player has one of your Viscount markers that looks like a little man on a horse. And these Viscounts are going to be moving around this rondel. You're always moving clockwise around the rondel, and there's 2 paths on it. There's an outer path and an inner path, and then there's some connections in between them. So whenever you're moving a number of spaces, you can move to the right, but you can sometimes move up to the outer or down to the inner and take an action that's on one of those 2 spaces. But the way your turn's going to work is that you're going to play a card from your hand. You're going to have a hand of 3 cards that are drawn out of this deck that you've been building, and you're going to put it on the left-hand space of your player mat. On that card is going to be a coin cost in the top left-hand corner, and that's how many movements you can do. So you're going to take your little Viscount marker, move it that number of spaces, usually between 1 and 3, and then you're going to get some actions available to you in that space. If you're in the outside of the board and you have the right icons to do it, you can either take a trade action, which lets you use these little bag icons that are on your player mat and trade them for the resource at that spot. Or you can take a build action, and it's going to let you take one of the markers. You've got these buildings across the top of your board, put them out onto the main board in a space, cover an icon, get that bonus, as well as get whatever ongoing bonus you just uncovered from your player mat. If you're down in the lower areas of the board, you're either going to be, I think it's scribing, but basically there are these little books, stacks of books. There's 5 of them around this rondel, and you take the top one off of there, and you get whatever immediate benefit is there. But then there's some end game set collection points if you have, basically a set of the 4 different types. It's a certain number of points. If you have a smaller set, it's worth less points. So you either want to have a variety of those, but also if you can get the most of a certain color quickest, you're going to get some bonuses. And then the last thing you could do when you're on the inner track is you can send workers out into the castle. Thematically, it's kind of interesting. You're supposed to be these Viscounts that are in the late stages of this kingdom. The king is no longer in favor with the people, and so you're trying to balance having some influence in the castle by sending workers out there, but also, kind of setting up your influence out into the countryside and with the people that are out there. Okay, so a lot of stuff I just talked about. The most interesting thing here, though, like I said, is the deck building, because what's going to happen is that you've got 3 spaces on your player board where you're going to play cards. So you play 1 card per turn, and on the next turn, when you play a new card, you move that 1 card over 1 space. Now you have 2 cards on your board, and by the third turn, and for the rest of the game, you're always going to have at least 3 cards showing on your player mat. And those cards all have some icons on them, and they're going to help you do one of those 4 actions, or multiple of those 4 actions. So there are 4 icons. You can either get the little blue bags, which are going to help you in your trading. You can get the they look like fleur-de-lis, and the more of those you have, the more people you can put into the castle. You can also, one of the icons will help you transcribe, or make these little books that are available to you. Or there's one that's going to look like a hammer, and that's how you're going to build castles. And so the more of a specific type of icon is going to help grow the type of action you're doing in that turn. And you're going to set yourself up by trying to set up multiple of those icons. Each of the cards may have multiples of those icons on there. So when you're playing your cards from your deck, you're going to get to use them for multiple turns in a row. And then there's also some things that will let you kind of manipulate, certain actions that will let you manipulate those cards so that you can move them around in your tableau. But basically, after the third time a card's out there, it's usually going to fall off. Aside from those benefits of having the cards out there, they will all usually have a one-time benefit. It will either be a benefit that when you play it, you get an instant bonus, or when it falls off the player board, you'll get an instant bonus. Those are usually a little bit more powerful because you have to wait for them. Or they may have an ongoing benefit that will benefit you the whole time they're on your player mat. So you have a bunch of different things that you're kind of observing as you're picking up these cards. The other interesting thing about it is that the way you pick them up is that at each of these pie shapes in the board around the castle, there's going to be 5 face-up stacks of these cards. So wherever you end your Viscount as he's moving around the castle, you have the option of buying the card that's available there, put it into your discard pile, so that it kind of builds up your deck and makes it more powerful later. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on here, but my favorite part is that deck building. The fact that you're not just, building up a deck so that you can play a hand of cards and use it that turn. It's that you get to play a card out, try to plan for the next few turns. What are you going to be doing? What are you trying to focus on that turn, and take advantage of it while you've got it, but also making the decisions about what one-time benefits are you getting with it. This game, I'm actually kind of curious now. I've explained it. Do you guys have any idea what's going on after explaining that? Does it make any sense to you at all?
No.
Not at all, Tim.
Okay. And that's fine, because it is a lot of very unique stuff that's happening. And the first time I was learning it, I learned it out of the rule book. I was reading through it and going like, it just took me a while. I had the components in front of me and I was trying to like kind of understand the rule book, and it didn't feel straightforward. But then I started playing it, and it is very straightforward. It's a very streamlined game that takes you a couple rounds to kind of wrap your head around, because it's doing a lot of unique stuff, but it's very straightforward, and it runs very smoothly. So it doesn't sound like it, but I'm telling you, you just have to get through that first half of a game, and the game is a blast, and it is so much fun. There's so much variety. There's so many cool little bonuses that are triggering all the time. I didn't mention that as you send workers into the castle, it's got this cool mechanism where if you send workers into the first layer of a castle on one of these 5 segments, as soon as you have 3 of your workers in a segment on the first layer, you move 1 up to the second layer, and you move the other 2 to the left and right. So they kind of set you up for future turns to add more workers there. But as soon as you move up to the second layer, there's a different bonus at each area of the castle as you move up there. So you get a bonus right when that happens. But the same thing happens is you can push more and more workers up into the castle. Once you get 3 into that second layer, 1 of them moves up into the center of the castle. And the first person who gets up there is going to get this 5-point bonus. Plus, you always get a bonus resource when you get up there. But if somebody else ends up getting more workers up into that center section, they get to take that bonus from you. So there's a little bit of an area control element going on here. And then one other cool thing is that I mentioned a lot of how you perform the actions. One of the 4 basic actions around the board is having the most icons visible in your player board. But also, these resources you can collect, you can spend them to supplement those icons. So, for example, you want fleur-de-lis, which are going to help you put workers in the castle. You can also spend gold that you've traded for earlier and supplement that. So there's a whole bunch of ways to kind of set yourself up for big actions. They're going to let you do a lot of stuff. Lots of variety in the scoring. Because it's a deck builder and there's there's a huge stack of cards that you're going to see different at each space and kind of build up your deck every time. I played this game probably 10 times now, and it's all I want to be playing right now. And it's such a blast. I played it a lot solo. I've also played it multiplayer, had a great time in every instance. Once the players had wrapped their head around what was going on, it went smoothly. It's a game you could get back to and play quickly. I had a really fun time with it. This is a game that I told you guys when we go to PDXCon, I wanted to bring Paladins of the West Kingdom to play with the group. I actually think this is going to be more fun. I think you guys will like this even more than Paladins. So I'm going to be bringing Viscounts and hope that you'll play it with me up there. And does it sound interesting to you? I mean, I know it's a little challenging to kind of communicate how it works, but what do you guys think?
I am so tired right now, Tim. I have no concept of what's happening in that game right now.
Okay. Well, I mean, listen, you know how well I can explain the fox in the forest, so that shouldn't be surprising.
Well, I'll try anything. I will say that after Wayfarers of the South Tigris, I have I'm taking that one with a grain of salt. But my question was, is there any similar DNA there? Because I know this is all part of a loose kind of conglomeration, a series with the West Kingdom, the North Seas, and the South Tigris. Other than just the fact that it's kind of a series with North, South, East, and West in the names, is there anything else about these games that tie them together?
No, it's the same artist and some of the same iconography, which will make it a little bit easier to absorb because you'll be familiar with some of the iconography that's used in it. Otherwise, this game is absolutely no similarities mechanically. It's a completely different game. I mean, this is a deck builder, right? And Wayfarers was not a deck builder in any way. And this is a very unique deck builder. It does everything about deck building different that I've ever seen in a deck building game. So, and it even feels way different than the other West Kingdom games that we've played or that I played. So really, really, completely unique. I'm going to have you guys try it and see what you think of it. I've loved it. I'm really excited about it. Now, I know you're tired, Adam, but I did have one of our listeners had asked me to now that I've played all three, what is my favorite of the three, which would be the best to play, which would be the best to play solo. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to jump in really quickly. I intentionally went back and played Paladins several more times solo. I played a lot of Viscounts recently. So I'm going to rate the West Kingdom trilogy very quickly. Number 3 on the list for me is Architects of the West Kingdom. I think it is a wonderful mid-weight worker placement game, but it's the least unique of the three. And so if you don't have a great, kind of midweight worker placement game and you're looking for one, highly recommend it. It's probably one of my favorites of that weight, but it's a little bit lighter than I'm usually looking to play. So I had a blast with it. I actually may still pick it up. Number 2 is Paladins of the West Kingdom, which was a game I was raving about, in the last few months. Still love it. I just played it yesterday. I think it's a great game. One is that it is a little bit less unique, and it's I think a bigger brain burn. So it's a little bit harder to get in. You got to plan out your whole round. It just doesn't run as quickly, and there's not quite as much variety in the game because the basic mechanisms are always going to work the same. There are some cards. One of the things I love about Garpild's games is that they are very card focused. And so there's a lot of variety in in Paladins, it's like the citizens you can pick up and the invaders that you're trying to convert or attack, so that changes things up, and there's variety in some other ways, but generally the game is going to have a more, very planned out flow to it. Viscounts is much more tactical. So my number 1 game in the trilogy is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. And I was shocked by that because I really didn't know what I was getting into. I hadn't heard a lot about the game, but I am having such a blast playing it. It's a much more tactical game. So every game, it feels much more about the variety of things. Where did I land this turn? What can I do? What can I purchase? And then what comes up in my hand when it comes up later. All the things I love about deck building, and then just making the best of the hand you get and trying to plan around it. But it does it in such a cool and unique way, in a way that no other deck builder game does. The whole flow of the cards as you play them out, and the variety of choices you get when you're out there. I love it. So that's my number 1, both for multiplayer and solo. So there. All right. That's what's been on my table. Adam, anything for you?
Nothing on the table for me, but I'm looking ahead to a game on Kickstarter right now that's called Maglev Metro. And the one on Kickstarter is actually for an expansion. They're releasing some new maps. What attracted me to this game? Well, a lot of it was the components and the look and feel of this game. Now, this game is a pick up and deliver primarily game, Chris. And we said we didn't like that. That's right, thumbs down. But what you're doing in this game is, along with a pick up and deliver, you're building these routes to connect different stations. Maybe these stations are on the moon and you're picking up, I don't know if they're robots, I don't know if they're people, I don't know if they're astronauts, I don't know what they are. You're picking them up from this station, bringing them to the station that you want to take them to. And then once you get them to that station, now you're taking them, put them on your player board, and you're putting them in your player board, these little slots, dual layer player board. These little characters, they look like Flintstone vitamins. They look delicious. And slot them in there. And these are unlocking actions, and you're upgrading your power. You're upgrading, or you're just going for points, whatever you're doing. So you're building these tracks. Did I talk about the tracks yet? They're these transparent pieces, similar to like a New York subway map. You've got the green piece, the green line, the blue line, the yellow line, and you can't block anybody out. They are staggered on these pieces so that they, if you're looking bird's eye view or side eye view with some parallax, whatever, you're going to be able to see through all these pieces, all the lines running around. By the end of the game, you've built this metro system. Are you in London? Are you in Paris? Are you in the moon? Are you in all these different locations you can play this game? All these maps have a different little twist on them. Components look outstanding. It looks a little bit on the lighter side, but there's still chances for some deep thought, chances to be a little bit mean to each other. The game looks like a blast. It's on Kickstarter now. I backed it. We'll see if I keep my money there, if I pull out, if I chicken out before the Kickstarter's over. But this one has me at least very interested. That's Maglev Metro by Bezier Games. And the designer is Ted Alspach.
Adam, did you back the expansion at the same time? Did you just like go all in on what's available on the Kickstarter?
I did. Might as well just get some maps with the base game too. Yep.
Yeah. I've heard really great things about this game. It's actually one I'm really fascinated to try, which is surprising because like train games don't get me excited. Pick up and deliver doesn't. But everything I've heard about it, like you mentioned, the component quality looks really, really cool. And I've just heard it sounds like a really fun game, a little bit of an engine builder, it sounds like going on there. I would love to play this at some point. So really excited. When does the Kickstarter end, do you know?
So after this episode releases, there'll be about 7 days after this episode releases.
If it sounds interesting to you, even if you aren't able to get it on the Kickstarter, I assume you can still pick this up retail, or will be again at some point, because I know that it was available retail before. So it sounds like a cool game, Adam. And if you end up getting it, I'm definitely excited to hear what you think of it once you pick it up.
Right. So we talked about games that kind of surprise us and mechanisms that we don't usually like and that are used in an interesting way. Hopefully this is one of those for pick up and deliver that uses it in a nice way. And it's not the feature part of the game, but just a component of the game with a nice twist on it that makes it fun to play.
Well, there was actually like half a dozen games for once that I wanted to give a future take on. So many exciting things that are coming out right now that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to save most of them because I can tell that Adam and Chris are about to fall asleep here. I'm just going to really quickly touch on the fact that there is a new game announced by Mind Clash Games, who we've talked about a lot recently. Everything they do is a really unique game. It's a interesting production. They definitely have me intrigued every time I see one. And they just announced a game called Septima. It's about building the best witch coven. And the couple things I'll mention about it. One is that again, you can look at some of the early production pictures of it, and it's got some really beautiful, very artistic style. Nothing that I've seen in board game art. Nothing quite the same. I think it's worth taking a look at. But this number two thing that got me pretty excited about this is that they're calling it their most approachable game to date. And if you know Mind Clash, their games are amazing, big, heavy brain burners, complicated to understand, complicated to get into. And this is supposed to be something that will be much more approachable compared to the rest of the games they put out. And for that reason alone, I think it's something I'll be keeping a really close eye on, because if they can give me any kind of the experience of exploring their games that they have in the past without making it so hard to get into and learn the games and teach them, this is something I'm pretty excited about. It's a simultaneous action selection system, from what I understand. something about how everybody can choose actions at the same time, but if you happen to choose the same action as somebody else, you both get an extra benefit, but it also puts you at a little bit of risk. Apparently might raise the suspicion of the townsfolk and get the witch hunters after you. So some clever ideas of kind of working semi-cooperatively, but still trying to build your own system and build your own thing. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this. They're saying the date on it is 2023 release. I think it's supposed to be going to Kickstarter later this year. I haven't been able to find when that date is. It's probably out here somewhere.
I'm seeing summer of 2022 is what the website says.
Okay, so within the next few months, we'll see a Kickstarter on this available. I'll be watching it. Will I back it? Yeah, probably. But, if I don't, there'll be something I'll be watching once it comes out.
It's a Kickstarter, so, man, I'm sorry. That means you won't be able to get it then.
All right. Well, Chris, I already fell off that wagon a little while ago. I'm just being selective.
I appreciate your honesty.
Mind Clash is worth paying attention to. That will wrap up our episode of Board Game Hot Takes. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.